Well, the Greens leader Bob Brown has just held a news conference in Hobart to comment on scaremongering surrounding asylum seekers. Let's go to that right now.
One of the things that comes out of this is that every big mine that's being opened now is doing harm to the rest of the economy. The resources boom is pushing up the Australian dollar. It's maintaining interest rates higher than they otherwise would be, but it's not producing the jobs or the flow on to the economy that most Australians think it is. In fact, it's causing a blowout in the current account deficit, strangely enough, because so much of the mining industry is foreign-owned, up around 80%. The money flows out of the country, it doesn't stay here, that it's leading to a real economic disjuncture in Australia. Now, this has to be dealt with, and the government has to have the ability to have some control on open slather mining as it's been going in Australia. There has to be some order brought into the mining industry for the sake of the job-rich rest of the Australian economy. And I repeat again, the big mines, the big flow of money out of the country, the resources boom is actually harming job growth and the interests of the rest of the job-rich part of the economy. Mining is a tiny percentage of jobs in this country, but it does a lot of harm to jobs elsewhere. And that's something the government has to address. The Greens will go to the tax forum in October, well prepared to get the government to go back to look at Treasury's proposal for a proper super profits tax. And that money ought to be coming from the mining industry. We are in the absurd situation now with the Gillard government's second rank profits tax of quite likely seeing more money flowing out of the federal government coffers than into it, because they'll get less coming from the mining industry than they're going to have to pay out to state governments who are jacking up royalties. Witness New South Wales, $1 billion it wants in extra royalties. $1 billion goes out of federal coffers, $1 billion and goes to the mining industry. $1 billion the mining industry is not paying. And on top of that, the federal government is aiming to reduce corporations tax, so the miners pay even less through the usual tax system. We could end up here with the extraordinary situation where instead of having a resource boom tax to help Australians with projects like health, education and high-speed rail, we're going to have an increased deficit at federal level and more jobs lost as a result.
So a complete overhaul is needed?
A complete review in light of the emerging and blatantly clear evidence now that mining's not good for the rest of the economy in the way the mining industry would have it. Mining isn't the jobs creation boom that the mining industry would have it. It harms other sectors of the economy. Mining isn't good for small business across the country. It's repressive in boom conditions like we're seeing at the moment. The Prime Minister has decided now to move to the right of Tony Abbott. I don't know if this is a political wedge or simply a doctrinaire point of view that the Malaysia solution must somehow be wangled, despite the recent High Court decision, through legislation through the Australian Parliament. And here we have, and I've bitten my tongue for quite a while on this, but here we have Julia Gillard moving herself to the right of Philip Ruddock and John Howard in a repressive attitude towards the rights of asylum seekers to be processed onshore in Australia. We Greens won't have it. I won't have it. We are going to fight this right the way through the parliamentary process. The Prime Minister is wrong. She is downright wrong. She is letting down this country on immigration and the decency that Australians want to see towards asylum seekers. The polls show that by a 2-to-1 majority, Australians want asylum seekers processed on the Australian mainland. And there's an even less support for Tony Abbott's Turn the Boats Around. That's on 15%. The government's option is 28%. 53% of people want, and Australians are very decent about this, want asylum seekers processed here in Australia, as other countries do. And I will again be talking with the Prime Minister next week about this, but she is wrong. Wrong way, Julia Gillard. Turn round and go back. Regain the decency of Labor Party's core policy trajectory on this, which is to treat asylum seekers decently here on Australian soil so that they can be rapidly processed, and that's important, and brought into the Australian community. I was talking with Sarah Hanson-Young, who's just come back from Christmas Island and Curtin, the detention centre in the north of Western Australia, overnight. And, you know, the horrible experience for people who are being mentally traumatised by being kept in these facilities prolonged periods of time. She'll be able to talk more about that later at a press conference in Adelaide later today. But overall, what we're seeing here is a terrible circumstance for Australia, where a Prime Minister from a Labor Party is taking us into unnecessarily cruel territory when it comes to immigration policy. And as far as the bureaucrats, these turkeys out of the bureaucracy in Canberra who are prognosticating about Australia somehow or other becoming Paris or London burning, they should be out on their ears. There was a mistake here when some of them were kept on from the Howard era. But when they start that xenophobic prognostications against what the public is thinking, the decent public, which wants asylum seekers brought ashore, it's time they were put into some sort of other job. They should not be advising leaders of the opposition or government leaders, although I will ask the Prime Minister to make sure that Sarah Hanson-Young and I are briefed by exactly the same people when Parliament resumes next week. They won't get the easy run they got from Tony Abbott and George Brandis yesterday when we Greens take them on, because we believe their point of view is alien to the thinking of the majority of decent Australians. They should be removed from that position and put into something where they can twiddle their pencils without causing so much harm to the integrity and the decency of Australia's projection in dealing with asylum seekers.
Bob Brown, and we'll discuss some of his comments in a moment. But